Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Forgive me, my brother. I feel incredibly responsible to deliver some answers, or at least a way of thinking, as my brother and mentor, Dr. Ibrahim, mentioned. He is my mentor on strategic issues in many ways, and therefore I wanted to introduce to you some ways of thinking about the Sharia before we get into his strategic lessons as a background. I feel incredibly responsible for giving an introduction to the objectives of the Sharia in an hour and a half, which is a topic that I normally cover for an introduction in 36 hours in a course for introduction 1, and then another 36 hours for another introduction 2. And that is because Sharia, or the Islamic jurisprudence, I will explain some introduction, is a topic in which research started 36 years ago. And over 14 centuries, there were thousands of books that were written, and hundreds of cultures and dozens of languages that introduced different ideas and different aspects of what we can call Sharia. And it's impossible to grasp the details and to be somebody who teaches about that, or somebody who gives edicts or opinions, or what we call in Islam fatwa, about that, unless you spend a good couple decades really studying the history of that. Because there is a difference between the history of the Islamic jurisprudence and the Islamic jurisprudence. You cannot really apply the Islamic jurisprudence today without understanding the history of it. Because this is basically the heritage of interpretations and all of that. You don't have to copy any of the interpretations, but you have to study them, because that's where you come from in terms of Islam. When you say that somebody is a Muslim, it means that that person on a faith level believes in God and the hereafter and the prophets and so on. And on the practical level, it means that that person applies the Sharia. And therefore, it is whether the person has enough knowledge to know what they are applying or not. But basically, Islam is about applying the Sharia in its correct sense. What is Sharia? I will start with this and then get into some of the material that I have to cover. And I will cover the material very quickly, as much as I can, so I open time for the discussion. And I'm hoping that in my coverage, I just give the nomenclature, just the terminology that I will use in my answers, rather than just open the questions before giving the terminology. And I will try to cover as much terminology as I can, because this is a vast issue. And you're obviously going to ask questions that I answer all the time over the past while. And knowing the questions, the answers are full of vocab that I will need to introduce, because in order to tell you that this is a saying of the Prophet but it's not authentic, and therefore there are different opinions, etc., I have to give you some background that time is not going to permit me to give you, but I will try to use my minutes in the next 30 minutes or so to give an introduction. Sharia is a way that God revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said in the Quran, ثم جعلناك على شريعة من الأمر فاتبعها. We sent you, or we appointed to you a Sharia, and therefore follow it, O Muhammad. Every translation of that word is saying, we have appointed to you a road, a highway, a way. Sharia in the Arabic language is the way that the camels follow in order to get to the water. When you say Sharia, it means you have a lot of water that you are trying to get. That is a different word from another word that is called fiqh. Fiqh, F-I-Q-H, is an understanding, also a Quranic word. an understanding of the Sharia. It is the human understanding. And the person of understanding, who is in English would be called a jurist, is in Arabic called a faqih, or a person who understands. Allah is not faqih, because Allah in Arabic is shari'. Allah is the revealer of the way, and He is not the understander of the way. The understander, the person who understands, is us. And therefore a faqih is everybody from the companions of the Prophet all the way to people who are of knowledge. A faqih in Islam is not necessarily somebody with a degree from a certain university or a certain style of clothing or a certain kind of turban or a certain affiliation. A faqih is somebody who learns enough to become a faqih. There is no there is no offering of a status of a saint or a faqih in Islam, and anybody could be a faqih. And in fact, everybody in Islam is a faqih. Why? Because everybody has a room for what is called ijtihad, or reasoning. Every Muslim has an obligation to reason. If not in the interpretation of the text, at least in the application and the understanding. And therefore, faqih in that sense is a human being, is somebody, and then they become a jurist if they learn enough to become a jurist. And people start to trust them and ask them questions, and therefore they start to give answers. The answers could be wrong and could be uninformed, and they could be right. And it is up to the consensus of the community who is a person who is called a faqih. Over the course of the Islamic history, people were called jurist or faqih when the masses accept them. And over time, the scholars correct themselves, and over time, Muslims, however learned or unlearned they are as masses, they have a way of judging who is a true scholar of Islam versus who is not a true scholar of Islam. And therefore, when the masses judge a person to be a true scholar, that person becomes to be called a faqih or a jurist. Now, let me start by saying that the most important event that happened in, to me, the human history was the revelation of the Quran to Muhammad. The Quran is not a book where somebody is saying that Muhammad said, or somebody is saying that God said. The Quran is God speaking. And it speaks in God's terms, except for the opening chapter, in which it is a prayer. You start with, praise be to God, most merciful. We seek your help and we seek your guidance. Guide us to the straight path, the path of whom you are pleased with, not the path of whom you are angry with, nor those who went astray. So those 7 verses are the first chapter. That's my translation of that. And then from now on, it's only God speaking. The opening chapter is us saying, guide us to the straight path. And from the chapter number 2 all the way to the end, the 6,000 plus verses are actually that guidance that we asked for. And that is, I know ABC Islam, that you know that Allah spoke in the Quran, but that is very important because there is a difference between the Quran and any other speech in Islam, including the speech of Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As an Arab, and those who know Arabic would know, and as a person who studied the Arabic language, there is a huge difference between the language of Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, you know, the Quran, and the language of Muhammad. إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما بني الإسلام على خمس. This is very different Arabic between the Arabic where God is speaking and the Arabic where Muhammad is speaking, even though Muhammad is speaking in a very high Arabic, as those of you who studied Arabic know. And then comes poetry, and then comes everything else. So when God speaks, There is a very important question that throughout the Quran is teaching you to ask, which is the question of why. And it is very unfortunate that as Muslims we have a very weak a very weak ability to ask why today, a very weak argument for why today. If you want to say why, people tell you no, just do things, don't ask why. And but the Quranic logic, I argue, I'm writing something like substantial on that in my own research now. The Quranic logic is a logic of why, and there is nothing in the Quran that is not followed by the reason why this is said. From the first verse after that prayer at the beginning that says ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, the first verse in chapter 2, this is the book, no doubt about it, or this is the message, better translation, no doubt about it. In it there is guidance for those who are pious or those who are righteous, and therefore the purpose of the book is guidance. And then as you go in the Quran all the way to the end, the arguments are arguments of why. Whether the Quran is teaching you about the faith, about the articles of faith, or what we call aqidah in English, in Arabic, or whether the Quran is giving some do's and don'ts, some rules and laws, or whether the Quran is talking about history of the prophets and their stories, is talking about nature. The Quran is giving you the why. And I'll give examples. I could go on with hundreds of examples to make this point, because I think that this point is essential in the why approach we are going to take to the Sharia. And I think that this why approach is the original approach to the Sharia. This is not postmodern stuff or whatever it is, or revisionist or reformist. This is the Quranic language. When the Quran talks about that everything is written in a book, and every calamity that befalls you is something that God had written, and then it says, لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا عَلَى مَا فَاتَكُمْ وَلَا تَفْرَحُوا بِمَا أَتَاكُمْ. We are telling you this so that you are not too happy with what you gain, and you are not too sad with what you lose. And therefore, when the Quran teaches you something like the book where everything is written, the book of destiny that is, it is telling you why it's teaching you about the book of destiny. When the Quran is telling you about sending the prophets and the books, in Surah Al-Hadid, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, when we have sent the books and the messengers, so that there is a why here, so that people would establish justice. And that includes the correction of faith. By the way, justice is not just a social concept in Islam. Justice is also a faith concept in that sense. So, so that you establish justice. My brother read from Surah Ar-Rahman, the Most Merciful. The Most Merciful taught the Quran, created humans, and taught them expression. And then it says, what of your bounties from your Lord are you denying? And therefore, when the Quran is giving you the bounties of God, that He created you, the first bounty is the teaching of the Quran before the creation of humans. And why? Because humans without that message are lost. As simple as that. Are lost in the roads of philosophy and in the darkness of the human ideas, without that light that says that God is one, and follow the examples of the prophets. And if you are going to take any moral value from any perspective, you could have it deconstructed with a different philosophical idea, unless that moral value comes from an example. And that example you follow, which in Islam would be the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the example of all the prophets. And therefore it's fundamental to look at the Quran when it tells you why. When God spoke about nature, or in Arabic, al-khaliqa, or the creation, the word nature is not a Quranic word, and you will find me a bit extreme in trying to make my explanation in terms of the Quranic words, because once I jump into a different terminology, then I'm bringing a different philosophy. And the Quran has its own philosophy. So I will not mention the notions of democracy and rights and civic engagement and so forth in my introduction. You'll hear a lot of this from Dr. Huda and Dr. Ibrahim, because they will bring an Islamic perspective to that. But since I'm talking about the Sharia is from the Quran, and the Quran doesn't have these terminologies. The Quran is talking about values at a higher level of human understanding, and these values could manifest in human structures. So the Quran is talking about shura, about consultation. Consultation could manifest in democracy. A democracy would have pros and cons, and could manifest in other systems of government and other different forms of democracy too. And each of them would have pros and cons, because there is a difference between the divine talk and the human talk. And yes, the divine talk is understood with humans and human minds, but I cannot just simply say that shura, or consultation, for a very rough translation, is democracy. And I cannot just say that the speech about the Quran in whatever terms, in usury terms, like when it talks about riba or usury, that riba is a great sin. I cannot just simply take riba and put it on an economic system without understanding the differences between what the Quran meant by riba or usury and that economic system, how it works. In other words, the Quran is giving us a moral platform for human life, and we develop the philosophy as we wish. And then from the philosophy, perhaps we develop the systems. We usually develop the systems before the philosophy. But assuming that we are going to develop some philosophy that is going to sustain some systems. The Quran is not dealing with the systems as they are, and it has its own language in dealing with the systems, because it is meant to be a higher moral ground. And the higher moral ground with objectives, especially objective-driven, is going to reign over the particulars of our understanding of the law and of the philosophies, whatever they are, the political philosophy and the economic philosophy and the aesthetics, whatever you think as a philosophy, it's a philosophy that is post the Quranic understanding of the creation and of the Islamic worldview. Let me get into some details. Maqasid al-Sharia. Maqasid are the objectives of the Sharia, are the whys of the Sharia. And Sharia, as I'm saying, is an Islamic way of life that is revealed to Muhammad, peace be upon him. The role of Muhammad I will explain, because this is very important to understand. It's a bit nuanced. Maqasid are the objectives of the Sharia. Before we can talk about the Sharia, it is very important to think in terms of the Quranic way of thinking, which in my understanding is an objective-driven way. But this means that the starting point should be the revelation. The starting point should not be the reality. Because if you start from the reality, you will read the revelation in an apologetic way. So you start from a reality where the environment is destroyed, etc. And then you start to read the Quran in a way that allows you to destroy the environment more. But if you read what the Quran is saying about the environment and nature and its meaning and so forth, and then you go from the Quran to the reality, then you are able to correct the reality. Because the Quran, to me or to a believer, is always higher than the reality. And the level of justice and the level of humanity and the level of spirituality, to use an English word, that the Quran is using and saying and shaping you through the journey of reading it, is always higher than the human philosophies and the human systems. Because the human systems are struggling to either fulfill human needs, material needs, or even spiritual and intellectual needs, but they are very deficient. Because the Quran is beyond the human thinking. It's very futuristic in that sense, and especially that it is objective driven, or the logic is objective, as I'm saying. Therefore, if you are looking at the purpose, you are looking at the future. You are not looking at the past. To think in terms of maqasid, to think and make the objectives and the purposes that you understand from the Quran shape your thinking. As a jurist, if you are going to be knowledgeable enough, or as an applier of Islam, if you don't think you are knowledgeable enough. And as I'm saying, I insist that this is not for people who call themselves jurists. This is for every Muslim, because every Muslim is a jurist in a sense, and has a duty to reason with the Quran and read it with their own eyes in a sense. The Quran, in fact, is not only for scholars. The Quran is for everybody. We as Muslims now especially left it only for scholars to read, and that is one of our plights. And not only scholars, the older scholars and even the younger scholars don't read the Quran. They memorize it. They memorize the whole thing. I know so many people who know everything, but they don't understand anything. And if they understand some of the Arabic, it's in a very shallow way. And that is a major problem that we have as Muslims, that we don't read the Quran. In fact, the Quran is not only for Muslims. The Quran is for non-Muslims to read. Page 1 or page 2, it says, Ya ayyuhan nas, u'budu rabbakum. Like, oh people, here is a message. Worship your Lord. Read. And then it talks to the children of Israel. And then it talks to the people in Mecca. And then it talks to humanity. And then it talks to everything. In fact, the seen and the unseen. The Quran is a message for the humans and for what the Quran calls the jinn. I like Muhammad Asad's translation, the unseen or the hidden beings. So any hidden beings there that we don't see beyond the ultraviolet and the infrared are there. And the Quran is speaking to them too. And Muhammad met with them too, as we know very well from the Quran itself. Maqasid thinking, and I will touch on the topics quickly. It's quite challenging, as I'm saying, forgive me. First of all, we need to ask why, and I'm sure Muslims in the room will agree with me on this. Islam is becoming, as a reasoning method, is becoming like roads with traffic lights, and we never ask why we have traffic lights. We just stop in front of the traffic light. And why do we stop? Because it's red. I remember one of my daughters, when she was small, she used to ask why all the time. So why do we stop? She asked, we used to live in London, I guess. Why did you stop here? I said, because it's red. So, but why? Well, because there is a line, and it's the law. But why there is a line? Because the law, if we cross that line, they will give us a ticket. But why? Oh, because somebody might be passing, it's dangerous. Yeah, but why don't we hit the person and they don't hit us? Why don't we? No, because we're equal. We're equal. Why? Because there's something called justice. Why justice? Well, because Allah, it's one of His names, Al-Adl, justice. Why is He called justice? Well, I don't know. No, but why did Allah call Himself justice? Well, that's where we stop. We can't understand the nature of Allah, but we can understand everything else. And I think these questions of why are very important in education and in leading the Muslim community, as you brothers and sisters lead the Muslim community. Because if people ask why, then you tell them, no, this is how it is. You don't take them from the level of the traffic light to the level of the rules and the laws, and from the level of the laws to the level of the philosophy of the law and the values and the this mutual benefit and avoiding harm and so on, social contract, if you wish, kind of language in English. And if you go above that, it's the higher levels of justice and harmony and peace and so on. If you go above that in Islam, in asking why, you will get to the character of God. And in Islam, there is no rational argument for justice. And those who study law here, probably in your law school in an American university, they will deconstruct the concept of justice for you. And they will make it a social construct kind of thing, rather than something that has a root in rationality or in objective reality. The Quran tells us that justice is because God is just, and He wanted us to establish justice. He ordered us to establish justice because it's better for us. And He gives us in the Quran dozens of examples of how to establish justice when He gets into the details of things. One example, the details when He got into the writing of debts, ayatul dayn, and then when He talked, and I'll get into details just to give you one example of justice, and then He said, well, let the person who is in debt write the contract, not the person who is lending the money, and because that is more just, the weaker end would write. But if the person who is in debt cannot read or has a disability, then a guardian of that person should write. But the guardian should take care of justice when he deals with the writing of the debt of the person whom he or she is guarding, and then seek witnesses and so forth. So the issue is that justice is a divine order. It's not something that we establish socially out of our own whims. And therefore, when the Quran says that justice is the ultimate objective from sending messages and making the Sharia what it is, this means that we have to go back to the Quran to look for ways of achieving this justice, knowing that the Quran is subject to different interpretations and all of that. How do we know the right interpretation from the wrong interpretation? Is how much the interpretation meets the standards of justice that are set in the Quran, not are set by any Charter of Rights or any of that. This is all good, but this is not what I'm talking about or where I'm coming from. And therefore, if you bring from the Quran the criteria by which you could establish justice in a certain way, then the closer you get to that criteria, the closer you are to establishing justice. And therefore, Sharia, in that sense, has an objective of achieving justice, and that's why many scholars of the Sharia said this word, "Shari'atu adlun kulluha." Sharia is all about justice. In fact, I always like to quote Ibn al-Qayyim, one of the great scholars of Islam. Let me give you that, and then go to the thinking in terms of Maqasid. When he said, Sharia is all about justice, all about wisdom, and all about mercy, and all about good. And these are four things that are called the universal principles of the Sharia. These are the foundations of the Sharia on which the Sharia is built as a way of life. And mind you, again, and I'll repeat this, and forgive me, this is not coming from a human rights perspective or your typical Western or Eastern philosophy perspective. This is coming from the Quranic perspective of these terms. Justice, mercy, wisdom, and good, or common good, maslaha. And therefore, Ibn al-Qayyim says, every opinion that takes Sharia, or every interpretation that takes Sharia from being about justice to being about injustice, is not Sharia, is a fiqh. Yes, it's an understanding, but it's a wrong fiqh. And every opinion that takes Sharia from being about wisdom to being about futility is not Sharia. And every opinion that takes Sharia from being about mercy to being about cruelty is not Sharia. And every opinion that takes Sharia from being about common good to being about mischief is not Sharia, even if it is claimed to be so according to an interpretation. And here we start to get into the topic a little bit, that there is the divine message and there is interpretation or the fiqh of the divine message. We are as close as the Sharia or the divine message as close we are to the objectives of the divine message. And mind you, again, the objectives are from the script itself, understood within the constraints of the script. Not any definition of justice, and not any definition of wisdom, and not any definition of mercy or common good. because there are definitions of justice that negate other moral aspects in the Quran. People believe that they have a right to certain sins, and they are sins in the Quran, and they don't have a divine right for these things. They might have a legal right. That is a different story. Dr. Ibrahim will talk with you about this. I'm talking about the divine message here. I don't have a right to get myself intoxicated, even though I'm free to do that in America, let's say. Now, what the state should do and what the state should not do is a different story. It's a totally different story. I'm talking about the original right, the morality, the moral message. I don't have a right because I am a creation of God, and He told me, do not intoxicate yourself. In terms that bear no interpretations. It's very clear. Well, you will find the odd scholar in whatever century who said, yes, you can intoxicate yourself, a little bit of marijuana is fine. But but you see, it depends on what you refer to. If you're going to refer to history, and you say that Ibn Fulan, Ilan, from this madhab or school had said that you can drink a little bit, you will find somebody who gives you the justification for every sin in Islam. But if you go back to the Quran and judge these guys based on the Quran, you will see that some of them went astray in some issues, because the Quran, in no interpretationable terms, said that al-khamr, which is anything that hides your mind, intoxicants. Well, would be a good translation. It's not wine. Khamr is not wine. Khamr is anything that intoxicates your mind. Is a dirt from Satan's works. So stay away from it. Well, a brother last week, I was in New York, and he told me, well, he says stay away from it, but he didn't say don't drink it. I said, oh, come on. And, wallah, it happened, and he was serious, and I told him, come on, man, He said stay away from it, which means, and that leads to something that's very important. The spirit by which you read this message. If you're going to read it and you want to be a believer, you want to be a good person, you want to see what Allah is telling you in the message so that you obey, and you have this taqwa, you have the piety, and that is a very different reading from the reading which the Quran talked about, which is يَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ, to look for words that could mean tricks, that gets you out of the moral duties of the Quran. And that's what some of the guys do sometimes with the Quran, including some of the fuqaha in different times. They look for something that gets them out of the obligation, because the obligation is tying them to the higher principles and the objectives in a very strong way, and they want to get away with it. So the Quran is talking about marriage as love and mercy, and when they get to family law, they find loopholes in the language in order to justify whatever they want to justify. But the Quran defined it as love and mercy. But they justify, robbery in the name of family law. They justify injustice or domestic violence or something in the name of the language. But the language has to be interpreted in a way that does not defy the objectives and do not defeat the point behind the language, and that is extremely important. I know some of the interpretations are so widespread, and some of the narrations of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or the attributed narrations anyway, are so widespread, and that takes that responsibility. I was telling my brother about that inshallah, I hope during the questions and answers we have enough time to deal with some of the details, because the question of Sharia and its interpretation is a very big question, and there is a lot of wrong that happened in our history that we need to correct, and almost every wrong thing that you see on TV these gangs do in the name of Islam, you will find them somewhere in the history books of fiqh. Every act that you thought is horrible and is not Islamic, based on your understanding, I can find you some book somewhere, Fulan ibn Fulan, somebody, the son of somebody, Sheikh, Imam, said something. But what is the reference here so we don't go astray? The reference is the word of God and the interpretation of Muhammad. So if Muhammad didn't torture people, then there is no torture in Islam, right? But you will find some narrations, and especially in history, that so-and-so tortured so-and-so, and they threw them in fire, and they killed them, threw them from a mountain. And you will find these opinions in our history. But are they in the Quran? No. Are they in the Sunnah or the Muhammad's tradition? No. And that is very essential. I'm not calling for Salafism here. Salafism is another deviation from the true message of the Quran, in my perspective anyway, as an expert on this. But I'm calling for the return of the Quran and Sunnah in its original way, and understanding the logic of the Quran as a purpose-driven message. And every instruction is given based on the objective. It never gives you just a simple traffic light and that's it. Unless you are talking about something that, as humans, we cannot comprehend, really beyond the ultraviolet. Beyond the ultraviolet. I don't know, the attributes of God, because God is outside place and time anyway. He created place and time. He doesn't have before and after, and he doesn't have above and under, and he doesn't have in and out, because all of these are his creations. And therefore our questions of the before and after about God, or the above and under, and the in and out, and this and that, and all of these philosophical questions that we have no answers for really, are questions that we are not capable to answer, because we are created within a space and time, and above and under and before and after and whatever. Einstein showed us that time and space are linked, but we are still in the time-space world anyway, even if they are linked. But he is above that, beyond that. So when we get to why he is justice, or why he is merciful, or why he created us this way, or we just have to say we believe in his message and we have to follow. And this is exactly what the Quran is saying, that we have sent this message in two forms. In Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, verse 5, 7, we have sent this message in two forms. One of them is clear. آيات محكمات هم أم الكتاب. Clear messages that are the mother verses, or the mother signs. An ayah is not a verse. In English, an ayah is a sign. The mother signs of the book are clear signs, and other verses that are mutashabihat, that are allegorical is a good translation. And therefore people who have illness in their hearts, the Quran is saying, would follow the allegorical side in order to justify what they do, to spread mischief. So they follow the allegorical side in order to tell you that yes, you can do this and that with people. How can you avoid falling in the deviation of following the metaphors and the allegorical side in order to go wrong? Is by going to the mother part of the book, the clearer part. And therefore the clearer part reign over the allegorical part. Why didn't he make it all clear? Well, because he wants it to be a reference for every place and time. And for it to be a reference in every place and time, there has to be vagueness, there has to be general terms. No compulsion in matters of faith. This is a verse. But how does it apply to every place and time is different. And therefore you have to keep it open like that. It didn't give you no compulsion in matters of faith, and then 1, you cannot force anybody to say this. 2, you cannot force, and 3, you cannot. It didn't give you the statutes kind of thing, but it's giving you the higher principle. And these are the mother verses that we have to go to. A lot of fiqh deviated when they tell you that the mother verses are only guidelines, and you have to go to what is called the school of law, or the madhab, in order to understand the mother verses. And therefore they put the Islamic jurisprudence upside down. They put the Sharia upside down. And they put the stem instead of the leaf, and the leaf instead of the stem. And therefore it's a deformed tree. Because if you understand the tree right, the stem, the mother verses, the principles, the objectives have to be in the middle of the tree, and then the leaves could turn left and right, and they could fall based on different seasons, and the details of the branches and the leaves are put in their place. The Quran itself described itself as a tree in that sense. A good word is a tree, and in the interpretation, many interpretations said this is the Quran itself. That tree, our understanding of it, if we don't understand the principles and the objectives and put them in the middle of the tree, then we are putting the leaf instead of the stem and the root instead of the fruit. It's very important to ask, I will skip a lot of details, it's very important to ask why the Prophet, peace be upon him, did some actions. And that is the nuance in understanding the Sunnah that I'm going to get to. The Prophet is an illustration of the Quran. But he is an illustration in a number of ways, not just in one way. Sometimes he is an illustration of explaining something in the Quran that is mentioned in general terms, and he is supposed to give us details to explain. وَنَزَّلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ. The Quran is saying we have revealed the Quran to you so that you illustrate to them. Illustration has a number of modes here. One is to tell us how in details. So the Quran is saying وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. Establish prayers and give charity. He said prayers 5 times a day, 1 time in the morning, 1 time in the evening, and you pray this amount, and pray as I pray. When they asked him, how do we pray? They were confused. It's quite a procedure. So pray as I pray. And then he started to pray. And he told us that he didn't know how to pray. The angel came to him and showed him how to pray in a human form. So this kind of illustration is a very literal illustration. The Quran is saying give charity. So he illustrates by telling us, well, if you have an accumulated wealth every year, give 2.5% of that in charity. Now, there is an element of vagueness here, because when he says, if you have gold and silver, after a year, take the quarter of the 1/10, which is 2.5%, and give it out in charity. Now today, we could have gold and silver, and we could have diamonds, and we could have oil, and we could have many things. And how, so therefore the scholars started to debate, what do we do? The usual thinking was to do an analogy between what he said that is clear and between the question we have in today's life. So therefore, now gold and silver, you give 2.5% if you accumulate wealth for a year. And that is how, by the way, the economy in the Islamic perspective works without interest. Because it's an economy where your hoarding of the wealth depreciates the value of the wealth every year. I'm not going to get into technical details, but this is the philosophy of it. So therefore, give 2.5%. Now, diamonds, many scholars would say, well, no, you don't treat diamonds like gold and silver. Why? Because the essence of gold and silver is a metal, but diamonds is different. Is the metal? No, it's not a metal. Okay, those who agree that it's a metal, they say, well, because it's a metal, what's called illa, or the rationale. What is the rationale behind the gold and silver charity? It's the diamond. It's the metal nature of the gold and silver. And therefore, what is the rationale? If I have a well of oil, do I give charity similar to the gold and silver, or similar to finding a treasure in whatever, another hadith, another narration? Most scholars say no, this is different, because if you find a treasure, it is metal, but if you have oil, it's not metal, it's actually liquid. They go back to what? They go back to what they understand is the rationale behind the rule. And they don't think that the objective of the rule is enough evidence to make an analogy. And that is a very wrong understanding. And that is where we have a problem. almost in answering many of your questions, almost this would be my argument, that look at the objective. If you understand the objective of the charity as the Prophet said, I'm actually telling you, he said, something that I'm taking from the rich to give to the poor. إنما هي صدقة تؤخذ من أغنيائهم وترد على فقرائهم. I'm only taking something from your rich, giving it to your poor, so that they don't ask, so that they have dignity, basically. أغنوهم عن السؤال في ذلك اليوم. Give the poor enough for them not to ask. That is the essence of the message. But the logic of jurisprudence did not follow the why and followed the what. And the following of the what without the why, because yes, I will discuss with you, I'm sure, that the why opens the door for changing many of the things. And then we should then differentiate between what is changeable and what is not, and what is immutable and what is not. And that is very important in Islam, because Islam is not all changeable and it's not all immutable. And charity is a very good example. If we think literally about the charity, or we think rather in terms of the what, the metal nature of this, why did he give charity at the end of Ramadan? Oh, because it's food. So yes, you can give macaroni and rice and whatever and donuts, but you cannot give money. And we have this debate. Why did he look at the moon? Well, because the moon, when you see it in a certain site, there are different kinds. It could be a thread, it could be this and that. So if you see the thread, but why? Well, to start Ramadan in time. Well, can we calculate? Most people tell you, no, you can't, because he saw the moon, he looked at the moon in order to know the beginning of the month. And calculation, yes, it achieves the objective, but it opens this objective kind of purpose, kind of loose end of Islam. And that's why most scholars would not agree to the calculation of the moon. Even though they agree to the calculation of the prayer times, which is the same thing anyway. Why did we judge that? Like when the woman came to him with the boy, more serious issues, with the boy, and told him that I and his father got divorced and he wants to take him from me, and where is the man from, and where are you from, etc. And she said, I want to go to my tribe, back to my tribe, and eventually get married. And then after knowing the details of the case, he told her, well, keep your son until you get married. And then he can go to his father. In a different narration, he told the son in a different case, where do you want to go? He made her stand here, and he made him stand here. The guy took his mother's hand. He said, go with your mother. These kinds of hadith or narrations, they become very serious, because if you're going to make a law based on the Sharia, how do you read these? Are you reading that he is trying to achieve the best interest of the child, as many scholars said, or as the vast majority of them said, no, it's about the male and the female, it's about the metal, it's about the liquid, it's about the day of the week, or the winter, or the summer, but it's not about the purpose. And without looking at the purpose, Imam al-San'ani, for example, read Subul al-Salam, one of the comparative books in fiqh. And San'ani, one of the scholars of Islam, I think his understanding of that chapter was incredible. He said, Sharia, when it comes to divorce issues, revolve around the best interest of the child. Maslahat al-walad. This is not an American term. I'm just using the American language because this is, the legal language. Here is the best interest of the child. We have in Canada the same law. But in Arabic, he said, maslahat al-walad, the good or the best for the child. وَلَا تَحْتَمِلُ الشَّرِيعَةُ إِلَّا هَذَا. Sharia cannot say otherwise, because he discussed over a whole chapter in his book all of these debates between those who talked about the males and the females. And okay, when in a custody dispute, how can we judge? Okay, go back to the Prophet's narration, because he's the illustrator of the Quran. The Quran is not giving details on that. But the Quran says, treat each other with justice, and remember the good that was between you one day, So the Quran is giving the moral picture. Good. The Sunnah, within that moral picture, or the Prophet within that moral picture, judged that one time he asked the boy to go with his mother until she gets married, and then he goes to the tribe of the father. And a different case, he asked the boy to choose. Then they went into the case itself. Oh, this was a boy under 9, and this was a boy above 12. Oh, he called him boy, therefore he is still small, but he called the other guy sabi, or teenager. Therefore, if he is a teenager, then he can choose, right? They know the law very well. But if he is a boy, then he cannot choose. Then, okay, but why? Why did he do that? A few scholars were brave enough, and I'm just because I don't have time, I will be, perhaps brave enough to tell you the summary of it. A few scholars were brave enough to ask why, and to follow the why, because I know that the why will open questions of loose ends and relative thinking in many ways, not in everything. But they did not want to open the why question, and therefore the minority of scholars had taken opinions that are commensurate and congruent and compatible with the higher principles. And so it's very few where people say, well, no, it's actually about the child and what's best. Oh, but how did the Prophet, one time he gave him to the mother, and the other time he gave him to the father? Well, scholars then, when they had something that is called difference or contradiction, they started to apply something that's called abrogation or a naskh. They said, well, which one comes first? Oh, this was in Mecca and this was in Medina. Okay, then in Mecca, for example, so therefore Mecca was before Medina, so therefore the one in Medina abrogates the one in Mecca. In Mecca he made peace, and he made how can Islam be about both? Depending on the level of education of the masses, scholarship thrived or declined in our history. And when the masses become less educated, as we had in the Islamic history in its lower points, you will find that scholarship is deviating from the higher principles. Why? Because the masses put pressure on the scholars. Oh, is this a reality? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I deal, as my brother introduced yesterday, in a number of fiqh councils, fatwa councils, in the Arab world and India and in America, now in Canada, we have a new council. And when we deal with fatwa or legal opinions or juridical opinions, there is a lot of pressure from the community, from the people. And now that I say that, well, in issues of, let's say, custody, it is really about the best interest of the child, and it's not about male and female. I am sure that in the wider community, the males will not like it, because they like the law that is biased towards them in every Arab and Muslim majority country. And every Sharia council, I'm not sure if you have one here, with all due respect to the perhaps Hanafi, Shafi'i fiqh that you have here, it would be biased in that sense, because yes, it is about the best interest of the child, and he can be with the mother and can be with the father. And yes, there is enough evidence, we can get into that. But because people's interests contradict with issues of justice and all of that, you will find that the scholars go vicious against any opinion that tries to bring the principles to the center of Islam. And especially in two areas: the area of women and Islam, family and Islam, and the area of politics and Islam. So many opinions that justify tyranny and justify torture and justify whatever lack of human rights that people justify for tyrants out there, by understanding Islam in a way that is convenient politically for them in that sense. And if you try to bring the principles of peace and so forth, you're attacked by bringing a Western agenda or whatever it is and so forth. Even if you say, well, yeah, there is war too, and there is defend yourself too. It's not the other cheek religion. It's about defending yourself. It's true. But if you want to put Islam in its balanced and compound kind of understanding, you will face a lot of pressure from the people if they're not educated enough and they are not ready for a nuanced understanding of Islam, or they just want simple answers, they want to waste time, or they, over the centuries, they got used to delegating their religion to others, to somebody with a certain turban or certain whatever who will tell them what religion means. And therefore they don't want to ask for themselves. I receive questions sometimes that are like so silly, so small. The mosque is around the corner, and this and that, but to pass the street, cross the street, and I tell my brother, well, judge for yourself. I don't know if you cross the street would be dangerous, or I don't understand. But I thought I have to ask a scholar for. No, you don't. Just judge for yourself. Whatever. And sometimes more serious issues about things, and people. Just ask yourself, ask your heart. The Prophet, when the man came and told him, well, now there are so many rules. Now there are so many rules. I'm overwhelmed. What do I do? He told him, ask your heart. استفتي قلبك. Take fatwa from your heart. وإن أفتوك, even if they give you fatwa otherwise. And that doesn't mean I'm not. Again, for the simple understanding, this is, so there's no more fiqh. We're just making Islam a mystic experience. No, it's not. This is not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about the right and the obligation, actually, of every Muslim to practice reasoning in the Sharia for their own right and for their own application. And in most cases, you don't need an expert. You don't need a halal committee or whatever to tell you what to do. I'm on a halal committee in Canada for halal meat, halal food. And many of the questions, I tell my brothers, well, you don't need an expert here. I mean, this is obvious. We were dealing with a line of chicken back in Toronto where they have to produce 10,000 chicken a day or whatever from that line. And therefore they can't apply the Sharia standards. What are the Sharia standards? For another example, to put all the hadith and the verses and so on in one picture. That you take the animal, and your knife has to be very sharp and with the least pain, and the animal cannot see other animals while being slaughtered, and the animal itself cannot have been cursed and cannot have been mistreated, basically, or it cannot be an animal that ate dirt, etc., etc. There are standards. If you feed the animal dirt, the animal becomes haram. It's called jallala in fiqh. Go look it up.
Oh, mad cow disease.
Oh, mad cow disease. Exactly. So if you're gonna feed the chicken other chicken or blood or whatever, that is haram. There's no. Well, they said, but this is cheaper. I said, I don't care about the economic issue. You're bringing the theology guy here to tell you that this is haram. This is not. This is haram. Now. They said no, but we can't slaughter every chicken without seeing the other chicken. They have to go in a line. I said the technical thing is yours, but to me this is haram. You can't have the chicken see the other chicken. It doesn't work. This is torture, and the Prophet said that in clear terms. And actually, the implication of the Quran as well. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, there are some details, and then it says, إِلَّا مَا ذَكَيْتُمْ, unless you slaughter that animal. And Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6 or 7, it has lots of details, and so forth. So they say, no, okay, but we have to slaughter all of these. I said, maybe that is the why behind these many rules. Why do we have to eat that much meat? Maybe that's the why, unless we develop the technology. But what they did, and because they want to slaughter too many things, and you have to say Bismillah in the name of Allah before you slaughter the animal. Why? Because you are seeking permission from the one who gave this life. And yes, you're going to kill it, but you're going to kill it for the sake of eating, right? they can't hire people to do that, so they have this CD on a computer, and the CD says Bismillah, Bismillah, Bismillah. It was slow enough, it cannot slaughter the 10,000, so they made it go on high speed. So Bismillah, Bismillah, Bismillah. And they synchronized the line with the computer, so that it says Bismillah 10,000 times in that number of hours available for the shift for them to slaughter the chicken. And they have a halal stamp from every other committee in Canada and from every other mosque in Canada. But when they were, when they put me on that committee, it was not wise of them, because I was a troublemaker. I told them, no, this is not halal. This is not halal. And whatever you do, this is not right. But there is the shape of it. There is the Bismillah is said, and there is the cutting, and okay, the chicken is not going to look, because we're gonna synthesize the chicken. We're gonna what's it called? With electricity, electrify, shock. I'm sorry. Yeah, excuse my English. They have to shock the chicken before cutting them. So no, they will be shocked. They will not really see the other chicken, and so forth. Well, but that is torturing the chicken. That is harm. So now they said, well, but you're a Maqasid guy. You're an objective guy, and we have an objective to reach those 10,000, and we have an objective to make money, and we have an objective EC. So I said it's very important when you look at the objectives to differentiate between the human objectives and the divine objectives. I'm talking about the divine objectives mentioned in the Quran, but you are giving me the human objectives, and you're apologizing for them by looking for an evidence in the letter of the Quran to justify your human objectives. But your human objectives are not divine objectives. So making money is not a divine objective. Or, yes, well, it's good, but it is something that comes after you fulfill the moral code. You cannot making money or slaughtering a certain number or achieving certain growth. If we're going to talk economics, and many of the debates are about growth. But growth, where in the Quran is saying that you have to grow? The Quran says that you have to live well, and you have to have basic rights and basic needs fulfilled. And why is growth an Islamic objective now? That we have to deal with usury, basically, in order for the economy to grow. And that is not the Quranic philosophy, as I understand it. Bring an evidence for this growth thing. And because growth becomes so enshrined in their minds, they make it a Quranic objective. But there is nowhere in the Quran that says, grow your economy, right? But what do? We cannot deal unless we deal with the current situation. Yes, well, fine, deal with the bigger system, try to find a way, I don't mind. But if you're asking about the Quranic objective, then the Quranic objective is about living well. It's not about growing, and it's not about, and so forth. So the illah and the maqsid, that brought all of this, which is the rationale versus the objective. And it's very important to switch our logic from thinking in terms of the nature of the metal or the kind of food or the color of whatever or the time of day or night, to a thinking by which we think about even the Prophet's narrations. Why? Why did the Prophet do that? What was his objective? I was asked the other day about Islam and dogs back in Auda, and a sister was saying, why is Islam an anti-dog religion? I said, well, why? What is wrong with that? She said, no, but the saliva of the dog is dirt. I said, well, there are opinions that say that the saliva of the dog is not dirt. You don't have to wash it even. That's the Maliki. It's one of the bigger schools. Millions of people follow that opinion. You can follow that opinion too. You don't have to. But to me, it's something that has to be cleaned. It's not. But if it's not for you, that, yeah. But why when the Prophet ﷺ said that if there is a dog in the house, the angel doesn't come in the house. And she was asking because her son was telling her that because there is a dog in the house, he can do whatever, because the angels cannot really write what he does. The guy is 15. The guy is 15, and he's trying to trick God. You know. So I told her, no, the angels are with him. She said, but the hadith in the narration, it says that the angels did not enter the house of the Prophet, and he was waiting for the angel Jibreel. He did not come, and he told him there was a dog in the house, so I didn't want to come. I said, my understanding of that is that the house was dirty. That's why he asked, get the dog out of the house, because the house was dirty. It's not about the house it's not about dogs. And that's why every other scholar said, no, but it depends on whether you own the dog for entertainment or you own it for hirasa, for guarding. If it's for guarding, yes, you can have it. And then the Maliki said no, but it depends. Guarding depends on whether there are thieves in the city or no. If there is a thief, then yes, you can keep the dog inside. But if there is no thief, you have to put the dog outside the door. And then they got into their debates. That is fine. But their understanding, none of them understood really that the angels will stay at the door and the guy could do whatever he wants in the house because the dog is protecting him from the angels. This is an understanding that is very similar to a lot of understandings about many things, but it's obviously misses the point of why. It is about dirt versus cleanliness. And yes, if you have a dog, some of my friends do have, with my children growing up, I totally refused the idea of dogs for that matter. For me, it's out of hygiene, even though I could take the lighter opinions about that. Some other people could deal with the hygienic issues. They could deal with that. That is fine. Some others take the Maliki opinion that nothing in the dog is dirt except for, of course, the urine and stuff. But other than that, and so forth. So it depends. Islam is wide, and the understanding is wide. Did the Quran mention dogs? It's very important. Why don't we go back to the Quran? Yes, he did mention the dog of the people of the cave, who were the believers, who went to the cave and stayed in the cave, and the dog was sitting with them. The angels obviously didn't leave the cave. They were with them until they died. But this is the previous Sharia, not our Sharia. Well, that is also something that is misunderstood, because the previous Sharia is our Sharia unless something is abrogated, unless the Prophet says, no more of this, or the verse comes and says, the punishment of adultery, it's no more stoning, and therefore stoning becomes abrogated in that sense from the law of the Torah. But otherwise, the law of the Torah is the law that the Prophet ﷺ applied until the Quran was revealed. And because he was a continuation of that. We have sent you this message in confirmation with what was revealed before, and a criteria to judge what was revealed before. So yes, in the Quran is saying that what was revealed before, some of it was changed with the passage of time, and the Quran will tell us what was changed and what was not changed, and so forth. But what was revealed before is not totally cancelled. And the Quran is talking about dogs in a few other places. وَمَا عَلَّمْتُم مِّنَ الْجَوَارِحِ مُكَلِّبِينَ تُعَلِّمُونَهُنَّ مِمَّا عَلَّمَكُمُ اللَّهُ. When you send your dogs to capture the prey for you and bring it, and this is a blessing from God, and that's why Imam Malik, one of the major schools of Islamic, the history of Islamic jurisprudence, he said, well, if the Quran is talking about the dog capturing the prey, therefore the dog is not dirt. And when the Prophet talked about washing the cup or the pot 7 times and all of that, he is actually asking them to just clean the pot, but he's not telling them that it's dirt in the ritual sense. And why 7 times? Well, because Arabs didn't know soap at that time. They didn't know soap, and it was developed eventually. Ashnan was developed, what's called Ashnan in fiqh, was developed eventually. It was not developed at the time of the Prophet. And therefore what they knew in Mecca, sand, and water. So he said, well, take sand and wash the plate 7 times. 7 times. Arabs, when they say 7 as well, they don't mean 7, they mean many. It's just, or 70. I called you 70 times. Who are the Arabs here? I called you 70 times. No, I don't mean I called you literally 70 times. It's just 7. The 7 means many. سبع ليال وثمان, and so forth, unless you count in a certain way. And that's important also to learn the language. The problem is that the lack of knowledge, I will stop here inshallah, the lack of knowledge and the lack of asking why and the lack of education in a number of details make certain opinions reign over the reality of what the Sharia is about, and make the Sharia no longer about justice and mercy and wisdom and about political agenda, mostly really of certain people who have political interests, and I'm sure some of your questions will bring that. And politics is vicious. Oftentimes they bring opinions and they bring forward opinions and scholars and ways of looking at the Sharia in a way that serves their agendas and just keeps their monopoly over the sources of wealth, etc. That's why you have a number of schools that are widespread, and that's why you have many local religious authorities or Islamic authorities insist on opinions that are harmful to the community for political reasons, local political reasons in that sense, to keep a grip on, family issues, on money. Seen that in many countries where the Islamic authorities, as minorities, they receive the charity and they receive this, and that's why they take the strictest opinions when it comes to charity, because they want to receive more charity and so forth. And they don't spend charity in certain ways because they prefer to spend to serve the institution they belong to versus the community they are trying to serve. And therefore, the Muslim community in India, for example, is the poorest. And I'm a fellow of the Indian Fiqh Council. And there is a major problem because the understanding of Islam in the Hanafi way, that is understood in India, is a way that serves the local authorities, the local Islamic authorities, and does not serve the community. And there are so many opinions that you can take in order to alleviate the status of the community. The community is the poorest, even poorer than the what's it called, the wayfarers, what do you call them in English? The lower caste. Yeah. It's even the untouchables. Thank you. So they are poorer than the untouchables. But you cannot, you don't want to give them opinions that raise their status a little bit, because there is a lot of politics involved in this, local politics of the madrasas and the Dar al-Ulums, etc. And it's very important that we understand that here in this part of the world, and we understand that politicians, not just in America, everywhere, when they want to gain some votes, they go right and they go extreme and so forth. They do that in many places in Southeast Asia, and they do that in many places in the Arab world, of course, and so forth. People who have nothing to do with the Sharia, the example of Saddam and others. And all of a sudden, Saddam Hussein wants to apply the Sharia. Why? Because he wants to kill the opposition. And he finds opinions about the apostasy law. And if you read Sheikh Taha Al-Alwani, our Ustad, rahimahullah, in the introduction of his book, he is saying how he was called by one of the ministers of Saddam to give a fatwa of the time to allow the apostasy punishment, because Saddam wants all of a sudden to be an applier of the Sharia, because he wants to apply the apostasy punishment on the Kurds and on the others that opposed him at the time. And how the Sheikh, rahimahullah, that's one of the reasons why he left Iraq, because he didn't want to give the fatwas that serve these people. Sheikh Muhammad Ghazali, another Sheikh of ours in Egypt, also wrote about a minister who wanted, and I will end inshallah, also
standing up to it, I'm getting coffee.
Wanted him to give a fatwa on the contraception and so forth. The government of Egypt at some point had a policy of what I could call, frankly, depopulation of Egypt back in the Sadat time, and they just wanted to push him to give a fatwa in order to serve that policy of Egypt. And he said, well, no, the Sharia doesn't mind if people want to have many children. Yes, the Sharia allows people to not to have many children or to use contraceptions for that, but this is just an allowance. I can't make it an obligation on people to do that. And again, that is why he lost his job in Egypt and he went to Arabia, and then he lost his job in Arabia for a similar reason when they wanted him to praise the system there in one of his lectures, rahimahullah, Sheikh Muhammad Ghazali, and Mufti of the time wanted him to praise the Islam of Saudi Arabia versus Islam of Egypt, because the Islam of Egypt is sick and all of that and has a lot of illness. So he answered that if the Islam in Egypt is sick, the Islam in Saudi Arabia is dead. So they kicked him out of Saudi Arabia. So I went to Algeria, etc. So what I'm saying is there are a lot of politics that happens, and I've seen some of this. I'll give you some anecdotes from my own story too, where politicians want to play with Islam for the sake of their interests, and those who insist on Hirasat al-Sharia, on guarding the Sharia, insist on the centrality of the Quran and its message, its moral message, and the flexibility of its application. And many times, I know you'll ask me about the criminal punishments, ask about slavery. These things are things that are subject to place and time. They are not the core issues of the Sharia anyway, and they don't apply here in any case, and so forth. So, an understanding of the Sharia that puts the Quran at its core and understands the Sunnah of Muhammad in light of the Quran, not the other way around. So, and therefore rejects an understanding of the Sunnah that contradicts with the Quran, not rejects the principles of the Quran when it contradicts with the Sunnah. And I will give some examples, I'm sure will come in the questions. That kind of understanding that looks at the purpose and the principles and makes the Sharia a means of achieving these principles in societies. God doesn't need us and doesn't need us to apply anything, and He doesn't benefit from anything we do. He sent this Sharia for us to live a better life and to be better believers and so forth. And He considered everybody equal. And He did not reveal in the Quran any authority structure or any of that. The Quran in that sense is very different from the Bible and the way it puts the church as an authority for religion. Islam doesn't have, the Quran mentioned mosques a couple times as pure places where people go and worship. But it doesn't give a mosque an authority, a political authority, that is. Of course, it's very important to organize ourselves, and our brothers here are doing a great job. But the Quran is not giving you an authority. This is just people asking you to organize their affairs. It's different from a church and a pope and all of that. Islam doesn't have any of this because Islam wanted to keep the principle, not the people, at the core of the message. And the principles manifest in people's lives and not the authorities. And the authorities, if they go wrong, they become defiant scholars. As we have a lot in our history, scholars who went wrong, scholars who went astray, scholars who brought opinions that are called irregular opinions or opinions that defy the principles. How do you call an opinion irregular or an opinion wrong? When it defies the principles. Otherwise, an opinion that is based on understanding is a valid opinion. Understanding of the language, of course, and so forth, the implication of the language is a valid opinion. But we are in a stage where in the public understanding of Islam, people don't have a sense of what the Quran is about. I noticed many of you are professionals, and perhaps you don't read the Quran because you think that the Quran is for scholars. The Quran is for everybody. The Quran is for you. And if you are a psychologist, and you read the Quran, you will see dimensions of your background in the Quran that no sheikh will see. And therefore you can do a better job as a psychologist, as a counselor, as a lawyer. As you know, there's a difference between the fiqh and the qanun, between the Islamic jurisprudence and the law. As a lawyer, when you read the Quran, you will see things that the faqih wouldn't see, because the faqih is talking about divine law, is not talking about the state. The state is a different story, and the different courts and the different kinds of laws and the different. With your eyes as a lawyer, you will see things that the faqih cannot see. As a mother, as a sports person, as an artist, you read the Quran, you will see dimensions that no faqih had ever seen. And the Quran is an open book in that sense, that we have to bring back with its message and its objective. I hope that this was not too long, but I'm hoping that this gives, at least as I'm saying, the vocab by which I could answer your questions, inshallah. And jazakumullah khair, barakallah feek. Assalamu alaikum.
I think we should let the rest of this lecture be driven by your questions. But if I can say some critical distinctions: Sharia, divine, the path that leads to something else; fiqh, the interpretation of Sharia, a human interpretation, absolutely critical, because if you push the two together, you confuse the two, you get the kind of trouble that I think we find ourselves in today. I think that, to summarize what, in my own terms, what Dr. Jaser says, that if this Quran, and even by that extension the Sharia, is to be what I would say universal in space, eternal in time, and adaptable to circumstance, then the Maqasid approach is the only one. Because if you lock it up in a space, the Middle East, if you lock it up in a time, the time of the Prophet, it will not be adaptable to new situations. And I think the very important input about what is allegorical then may be less allegorical today, because technology and our minds have developed to have better understanding. And so when what was allegorical there, reaching into the stars, is after 1962, when I was born, less allegorical, because a rocket had taken someone to the moon, and there's now a rover on Mars. But there are still lots of things that we haven't pierced yet. So I think those are absolutely crucial things. But let's, again, the invitation to you is, you need a coffee break, quietly go about it as you have. Make sure that, that tap is gone now, because it was leaking. Do it quietly, but let us keep the conversation going at this point.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So will you conduct this orchestra?
Yes. You want to? Oh, I will take care of it.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Please, Brother Haidar. I will give Brother Haidar. Yeah.
First, Brother Haidar.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I have two.
The president is first.
Yeah. But he's a humble president, mashallah. Very humble.
Presidents. I have two questions.
Allah.
For a wonderful introduction. So, as Muslims, majority would say we derive our principles based on Quran and Sunnah, which is the practice, the sayings of the Prophet. When you talked about in the introduction, you talked about Quran as the primary source. How do you? There's lots of scholars who would use Sunnah in the sort of equal weighting in my understanding as the Quran itself. How would you put Sunnah in the context of the discussion that you had this morning? When you talk about the Maqasid, where does the Sunnah come into the play? Would be something that I wanted to ask. The second question is...
I forgot when there's more than one question. Let me get that. Okay. Is it related or?
It is somewhat related.
I'll give you a clue.
Okay, sure.
The second question is, there's verses in the Quran that are generic, like no compulsion in religion. There's also very specific. When you knock on the house, go to somebody's house, you knock on the door. Sometimes I feel like, why does the Quran go so minutiae, and sometimes at a very high level? How do we put this in context?
Jazakallah khair. Well, the first question about the Sunnah, about the prophetic tradition, where is the Sunnah in this? The Quran tells us that the Sunnah is an illustration. وَنَزَّلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ النَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. We have revealed this book to you, or this reminder to you, so that you illustrate to people what was revealed to them. It is very important to put the Sunnah in that in that box as an interpretation of the Quran, and an interpretation that has different intents. Some of them are pure intents of just a man living in Arabia, and therefore he ate certain things, he didn't eat certain things, he used certain ways of brushing his teeth and whatever, certain tools for a knife or a sword, or he didn't have an intent of making these parts of the Sharia, versus a general intent of explaining the Sharia. So that's one important definition in terms of the Sunnah. And the intent of explaining the Sharia has a number of intents within it. One of them has to do with judgeship. So when I talked about the boy, he gave the boy to the mother or the father, these are acts of judgeship, and therefore they are precedents rather than sunnah in that sense. I'm speaking from the traditional fiqh here, right? And therefore, and acts of imam, acts of siyasa, the acts of leadership. So not everything that he ﷺ did as a leader is something that is intended to be for every place and time. So he fought with the Jews in Khaybar. And some people say, well, therefore we have to fight with the Jews in every place and time. Well, he made peace with the Jews in Medina. Oh, therefore we have to make peace in every place and time. Oh, well, he fought in Khaybar, how many years? 10 years or whatever after Medina. Therefore, the fighting abrogates the peace. No, that is a thinking that we don't have to indulge in. This binary thinking is a very simplistic thinking. Why don't we say, well, why did he make peace with the Jews of Medina? Well, he was new to Medina. They were residents there. He wanted to protect Medina. He told them, let's have an agreement to protect ourselves. And that's why it says, Al-Muslimuna wal-Yahud ummatun wahida. Muslims and Jews in Medina are one ummah, are one nation, protecting themselves and defending Medina against others. Muslims will ask Muhammad ﷺ about what they need, and the Jews will follow their religion and their Sharia in that sense. And the general leader is Muhammad, etc., etc. But it doesn't mean that this is part of the Sharia. And then when he fought with them in Khaybar, well, they had this covenant, and they broke the covenant, and they tried to kill him several times, and so forth. And they allied with the Mecca when they came, Banu Qurayza, etc. They allied with Mecca in order to kill him in Medina. So he gathered his army, and he went to Banu Qurayza, and he started to fight them. And eventually he fought them in Khaybar, and so forth. So what I'm saying is that if we understand the Sunnah in terms of the why, especially as a judge and as a leader, then we are able to read the Sunnah properly. And there is a part of the Sunnah in which he is just explaining the Quran in a very ibadah way, in an act of worship way. So how do I pray? He's showing us. How do I wash myself? Well, the Quran is giving details, but he's giving more details. How this and that. So he is explaining the ibadat in a very clear way, and therefore we have to follow him in that. But we cannot follow him, ﷺ, literally, and he didn't mean that, to follow him literally in matters of policy, if you wish. When he said that every piece of land that is closer to the water should get the water before the further piece of land, etc. This is not a sunnah, and this is not an irrigation policy in Islam or any of that. It's just a way he resolved the conflict. And therefore you can have a different irrigation policy, and you can have a different way of looking at war and peace and looking at trade and so on. But he stopped some acts of trade because they lead to usury. Oh, that is Sharia, because he is preventing us from usury in the form of one of the ways of doing usury. He is preventing us from adultery by saying, well, this kind of marriage is not allowed, because he is preventing adultery. But there could be other forms of adultery that come out that he didn't think about, and they continue to be adultery. You see what I'm saying? So the Sunnah, it's very important to stress the principal place of the Quran. Why as well? Because the Sunnah is narrated in different ways, in different authenticity levels. Not every narration of the Sunnah is authentic. In fact, you cannot divide them into authentic and non-authentic. There are different levels of authenticity. And some of the authentic narrations contradict with other authentic narrations. And therefore, you have to deal with the contradiction by saying that one of the narrators made a mistake. As simple as that. And I know that it's very difficult for us to swallow after all the glorification that we gave in our Islamic education for Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. And they are great Imams. Imam Bukhari was a genius, and he collected the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in a way that is genius. But in Bukhari, there are contradictions. There are ahadith. There